And late 2012 was when I finally decided to play Demon Souls. It had been out since 2009, I think, and I actually remember watching on XPlay on one of its last ever, like probably its last year it was on TV. It was like 2009 or so. I was watching it, a demo for it, and it seemed really interesting. The whole message system and how you had to go to the bloodstain to retrieve your souls and everything. Plus, it was this cool like castle area with swords and stuff, and that they were showing. I think it was showing the Bolitarian Palace.
Demon Souls takes you on an RPG adventure that rewards you with pleasure if you can take the pain of dying.
And I didn't have a PS3, and it was an exclusive, and I was like, this could be worth getting a PS3 over. I wouldn't end up getting a PS3 till like 2012 or so. And I really liked that game, and so after I beat it, I immediately went to Dark Souls. And pretty much ever since I played Dark Souls, my opinion on video games has kind of changed altogether. There was kind of like my pre-Dark Souls and post-Dark Souls video game experience. Because Dark Souls, the whole series, but specifically that one, had such a profound effect on me. And what I really want to talk about is not so much all that, but how no game that tries to emulate Dark Souls has gotten it even close to right at all. When Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, there have been a lot of Grand Theft Auto 3 clones, and just Grand Theft Auto clones altogether. And there was at least one that was at least still somewhat fun to play, which was Saints Row. But they also had a lot of really bad clones. And Dark Souls hasn't had one good clone. And I'm sure there's some other Grand Theft Auto 3 clones, or just Grand Theft Auto clones, it doesn't have to be the third one, that I just can't remember, but that were actually at least kind of fun to play. Oh yeah, sure, like, I was just playing one today, Just Cause 3. Not completely a Grand Theft Auto clone, but definitely its roots came from Grand Theft Auto. That sandbox, hijack vehicle kind of style, although Just Cause 3, or just the Just Cause series altogether, you can, jump up off of planes and shit. You couldn't do that kind of shit in Grand Theft Auto initially, but it spawned games that are still fun to play, even if they're not as good. I played a lot of the Dark Souls rip-offs, or whatever you want to call them, or the Dark Souls clones. Rip-off, I don't necessarily mean it derogatory, but most of the games, that's their whole selling point. It's, they're called Dark Souls-likes, or a Souls-like adventure. The only game that's actually been Souls-like was Bloodborne, and that was by From Software, so only they can emulate themselves properly. There's a couple of key things that no developer seems to get right. At least I haven't experienced it yet, that there is a good Souls-like game. I want to know about it. And I want to play it, especially since there's probably not going to be any more Dark Souls games, which I think is probably for the best. But at the same time is a shame. The Souls-likes that I have played, one is Salt and Sanctuary, which, it doesn't succeed, but, to be fair, it is a lot different in its gameplay, as in it's a side-scroller, and it's an indie game, and it's not supposed to be exactly like Dark Souls. It is supposed to be sort of like 2D Dark Souls, and it succeeds in that. It's actually one of the more fun Souls clones, but it's still not that good, and mainly it just didn't appeal to me. And I played Lords of the Fallen, which was a colossal failure, and I played Nioh, which is not nearly as representative of a Souls game as it would have you believe. I go into more detail with Salt and Sanctuary. That game gets one of the things right, which is one of the biggest points in a Souls game, is hands-off storytelling. The Souls games normally have a cutscene at the beginning that kind of gives you the basic idea. It's not that long, Then through the tutorial, you know, it doesn't really hold your hand, but you get, you know, the basic idea of what you need to do. And you get the basic idea of who you are at the very beginning of the game. And basically, once you're past the tutorial and everything, you're just left to your own devices. And the story is there if you want it to be, and if you don't give a shit, you just want to play the game, which is more how I am. It's not that I don't give a shit, but my first time through the games, I didn't want a bunch of story. That's one of the things that I don't like about RPGs. I like RPGs, but a lot of the time there's just way too much damn story. The Souls games have a ton of story, and the stories are actually pretty fucking interesting. But they are there if you want them to be. Your character never speaks because you create your own character, which is another huge part of doing a Souls game correctly, or a Souls-like, or whatever, is you need to be able to create your own character. The character should never talk. There should be hands-off storytelling, and just have the story there if you want it to be. Or, like how in the Souls games, you can kind of put together what's happened in the area just by what the area looks like. Like in New Londo Ruins, for example. I'm not going to go into great detail, I could, but... Or also, in Orlando, you know, any of that stuff. It's there if you want to be, also by talking to characters and reading item descriptions, which I actually think is a valid criticism of not being, like, a very interesting way of telling the story is reading item descriptions. But a lot of times, just where you get an item could be representative of the story. Lords of the Fallen tried to give it this big story, and it gave you this main character, you know, some Viking-looking dude with tattoos all over his face. And I played, I don't know, I got like 3 bosses in or something, and it was just fucking... I didn't like the guy's personality. I didn't feel that I identified with him at all. There's no character creation. You could change the armor and stuff, but whatever. And I liked its risk versus reward system. I found that interesting, but it just didn't capture the feel of a Souls game at all. And also the combat wasn't nearly as developed as it is in a Souls game. The combat in the Souls games is so well done, and it's just not nearly as developed. But my biggest problem with it was your guy talks too much. He's really lame. They tried to give this whole story, which just isn't interesting. You know, no character creation, which is just lame. And too much talking, and the NPCs were just fucking lame and super generic, especially like the hot chick NPC. Although some of the enemy design was kind of cool, but a lot of it was just really forgettable. And its whole spiel, you know, its whole shtick is, hey, this is like Dark Souls. Well, you failed horribly. And I kind of want to play the Surge, because I think that's interesting, like a sci-fi Dark Souls. Then I heard it was created by the people who did Lords of the Fallen, and now I basically have no interest. And if there's no character creation, you're automatically taking me out of it, because that's a huge part of the Souls games, is you get to create your own character. That's a huge part of, I think, of an RPG, is you should be able to identify with the character, especially if you want to do it like a Souls game did. So Salt and Sanctuary, it did the hands-off storytelling, where it basically didn't even really have a story. But I just didn't find it that fun. I found the 2D world a little too confusing at times, and I was really just playing it to hold me over for Dark Souls 3 before it had come out. But I think Salt and Sanctuary is just one of the better ones. At least it had some fucking character creation. Your characters look stupid, but it did have character creation. Lords of the Fallen was an abysmal failure. And then Nioh, which when I played the open demo, or open beta, whatever, actually seemed like it would be pretty good. It kind of felt like Onimusha with Dark Souls elements, like how your chi, or whatever the fuck it was, your soul's equivalent that you can regain, that you use to level up with, basically just your experience. You could lose it and then get it back. That's basically where its similarities with Dark Souls ends. But in the open beta, the game was much more challenging, and I felt like the game was just much harder. The combat was actually a lot more fun, a lot more interesting. And then when the game actually came out, I felt like they just really softened the difficulty. It just didn't feel nearly as hard. And again, the only way it's like a Souls game is the way it does the experience, where you get killed, you have a chance to regain your experience, and if you die, well, then you can't get it back. But what level you are in Nioh didn't feel like it made a huge difference to me. You also, again, it doesn't have hands-off story telling. There's a very vivid story, which I'm not interested in. Well, it's not so much just that the story is very vivid, it's just there's too much story. And also, it doesn't have character creation. Your character talks, but at least it did one thing right, where it got the combat system was at least fun. It felt more developed by far than the other two. But still, it's not a Souls game, and it doesn't feel like one. And I think these games are really just using Souls-like as a way to sell their games, when they're not really that Souls-like at all. And I honestly think that there will not be a good Souls clone ever. And that Souls-like will keep being bandied about and never actually apply in more than like one aspect.